A highly anticipated summit with a high-stakes goal. Russian President Vladimir Putin meets with U.S. President Donald Trump on American soil. Can these talks bring an end to Russia's war in Ukraine? Hi there, I'm Katie Simpson. This is Power in Politics. I'm in Ottawa, but right now all eyes are on Anchorage, Alaska. You are looking at a live shot of the podiums where later today we are expecting Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to give a joint press conference. That is the expectation at this point, but you never know what's going to happen. They've been meeting for just over an hour and a half at this point, and of course, we will bring you any update on those talks if we get them. But for now, we have plenty of coverage on this summit just ahead. Let's go now on the ground to where the meeting is happening in Anchorage, Alaska. That is where we find the CBC's Lindsay Duncombe. Lindsay, everything about this meeting seems so significant so far. Set the scene for us.
So significant with so much at stake, including, of course, what is next with the war in Ukraine, and so incredibly choreographed. I think one of the most striking things that we saw today was Vladimir Putin arriving at a U.S. Air Force base, walking on a red carpet, greeting U.S. President Donald Trump with a handshake and smiles as stealth bombers flew overhead. This was a statesman welcoming a statesman. The two men appeared to be standing as equals, something that is incredibly significant when you consider that Vladimir Putin has been isolated by the Western world as a result of the war in Ukraine, hasn't been welcomed like this since 2022. And now here we are setting the stage for what is next in the war. And certainly the big missing piece of all of this is, where is Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine? He is not at this summit. There was much buildup here, including pressure from Europe, from Canada, from Zelensky himself, concern that Donald Trump will do what he talked about days ago in terms of a land swap, changing the borders of Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump saying that this is a beginning, that he is not here to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine, but so much uncertainty, Katie, as we wait for what these men will say when they emerge from first a smaller meeting and then a larger meeting with the leaders and some key advisors.
So, Lindsay, what do both sides want out of this meeting?
Well, when it comes to Donald Trump, this is what he has talked about since he was running to become president again. He said when he was reelected, the war in Ukraine would be over in 24 hours. Well, certainly that did not happen. And in the past weeks, we have been hearing frustration from Donald Trump with respect to the war in Ukraine, and specifically Vladimir Putin, including saying that he would say one thing to Putin on the phone and then he would go and see that there had been more bombings in Kyiv overnight. The other thing that Donald Trump wants here is international recognition. Specifically, he's been talking about wanting a Nobel Peace Prize, something that has come up in the context of the India-Pakistan conflict as well as other conflicts. So that's where we see his participation in this choreographed spectacle. Now, in terms of Vladimir Putin, what he has always wanted is Ukraine, and his terms for how the war may end don't appear to have changed much. He wants to keep the territory he has. He does not want Ukraine to join NATO, and he wants a Kremlin-friendly government in Ukraine. Those are very far apart positions as we wait for what is going to come next. And it's been really interesting, Katie, to talk to the journalists here who represent Ukraine, who represent the Baltic states as well. I think for the Europeans directly involved in this, a ceasefire, an end to the hostilities that could be a beginning to talks that could include Vladimir Zelensky would be something that those parties would see as a success.
All right, the CBC's Lindsay Duncombe in Anchorage, Alaska. We will be checking in with you as this program continues on. Thanks, Lindsay. All right, we are now joined here in studio by Witold Gielski. You are Poland's ambassador to Canada. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. I want to start with what we've seen so far. Literally a red carpet rollout on American soil. The president clapped as Vladimir Putin walked toward him on that red carpet. They got into the president's car together and to travel to the summit site. I'm curious, what kind of message does that send to NATO in this moment?
It's a very interesting day that we're having right now. It's a meeting between two leaders, one representing the democratic world, the biggest, the most powerful country in the world, and the most powerful country within NATO structure, and the biggest in terms of territory country, which is a dictatorship and autocracy, a country and its leader that is allowing and having his forces mass murder other nations, other people, and is allowing his own people to die in thousands in a war which is illegal, brutal, and filled with hate. But the show that you've described, I think it's a way to open the dialogue by Mr. Trump with President Trump with Mr. Putin, and it's obvious that President Trump wants to try to make Putin welcome for those conversations, and there is a reason for it, because I believe that President Trump genuinely wants to have people stop killing each other on a very basic on this very basic level. So those theatrics and that show is happening for a reason. In that sense, my hope is that it brings real tangible results.
Do you have expectations, or do you have hope in this moment that perhaps there could be progress towards some sort of resolution, a peaceful resolution?
It's listening to the Polish politicians, I would say that they are very cautious in that kind of belief. They are rather, and the Polish messaging is, concentrated on a couple of points, which is very clear also on the broadly European Union level. Mm-hmm. So one thing is that Ukrainians have to be included in any kind of decision-making process, because it's about them. They are being murdered by Putin. And that also, Europe has to play a role in that process, and also that the ceasefire is the precondition for any further conversations, and the notions of land swaps, damaging the notion of sovereignty, breaking international law. These are the ideas that are outside of Polish interest.
Now, as Donald Trump was headed toward this summit, he seemed to sort of at least shift his positioning around land swaps. So earlier this week, we heard him, and previous weeks, we heard him say, listen, if there's going to be a peace deal, there's going to have to be some land swapping. And he sort of suggested that both countries, both Russia and Ukraine, were just going to have to sort of deal with it, which certainly sent off deep alarm bells in Ukraine as well as with NATO allies. On his plane ride out here, he sort of seemed to change that a little bit. He's told reporters that, it's going to have to be up to Ukraine, and that he's not actually here to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine. What does that say to you about what is at stake in this moment? And if Donald Trump is shifting his position without much sort of, background information, or there's no reason why he's shifting it, it's just shifting it, does that concern you about what could be decided at this meeting?
I think there will be many things that we will not know about the conversation, especially the part which will take place between the two gentlemen. Gentlemen, that's the wrong word. between the two leaders only. But many topics are on the table, and I think they will have. Both of them are decision makers. They're powerful politicians, so I think they will be discussing everything. But there is a certain structure that in the end they will have to operate within. President Trump had a good conversation with some of the European leaders, including Polish leaders, with both Polish President Karol Nawrocki and the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk were engaged in, either directly or indirectly. And the message in terms of land swaps was very strong from the European partners. President Trump does not have to take that into consideration, but at the same time he realizes that this European element of the puzzle is and will continue to be very important. And he does take into consideration a messaging coming from his close allies, such as Poland, for example. So I think there will be a number of topics that they will be discussing, but in the end they will have to fall in somehow into the structure that we are operating in. It's they can stretch the structure and work with in such a manner, but still.
So this is such a significant meeting. This is such a significant event. I'm wondering, given that Poland borders Ukraine, given you are a NATO member, a very large NATO member, what are the conversations happening like behind the scenes right now when it comes to what people are thinking about what they've seen from the NATO perspective?
The conversations which are taking place, probably a better person to talk about behind the scenes conversations would be an expert, not a diplomat necessarily.
Fair enough.
Because I would be happy to share some of the thoughts, but not necessarily on the record.
Not at the table. Fair enough. So, there's no way we're going to be able to predict what comes out of this meeting. That is one of the elements that puts the stakes so high here. In this moment, are NATO partners, are NATO members preparing for perhaps the situation on the ground to get worse? If this meeting doesn't lead to any sort of change in behavior from Russia, if they continue on with the assault on Ukraine, what does NATO have to do next?
That's a good question, and there are many answers to that question. Poland is very much on the side of working with Russia. On the side of thinking about peace through strength. Our history with Russia is quite horrid, and we've been oppressed, and I'm just like Ukrainians and other nations in our region. We've been oppressed, mass murdered, slaughtered, occupied by Russian. We fought them a number of times. A number of times we've been victorious. Today we're celebrating a Polish national holiday, which is related to the victory of the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, that we've saved Europe against the Bolshevik Soviet-Russian invasion back in the day. So we know, it's not that we believe, we know very well from our history that a conversation with Russia has to be based in strength. Russians do not respect documents, Russians do not respect agreements. And it's more difficult always for a democracy to work and to come into an agreement with Russia in that kind of context. So I think this notion of peace through strength should be recognized in conversations with the Russians.
All right, we will leave the conversation there. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, Canada's former ambassador to Ukraine, Roman Waschuk. He will be joining us talking about the high-stakes meeting, what the implications are for Kyiv. The meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian Vladimir Putin is still underway, and you're looking right now at a live shot of the room where the podiums are, where the news conference that will be held by both Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump. It will be in that room. And we're showing you this shot right now because more people seem to be coming into the room at this time. And a lot of them have little pins on their jackets. And as a reporter who's been at a lot of these kinds of things, what that says to me, the people who have the pins on them are usually parts of the delegation. So that might mean, they're filling in the room and things. I don't want to set expectations that things could be happening soon, because we certainly do not have that indication just yet. But there's lots of people in that room when earlier there hadn't necessarily been. But again, the joint news conference with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is supposed to start at 7:30 Eastern time. But when you have these kinds of events, you never know when things are actually going to happen. So as this is taking place, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he is not at the meeting, as everyone knows. And instead today, he offered his vision for progress on social media, writing, "The key thing that this meeting should open up a real path toward a just peace and a substantive discussion between leaders in a trilateral format, Ukraine, the United States, and the Russian side. It is time to end the war, and the necessary steps must be taken by Russia. We are counting on America." Roman Waschuk is a former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine. He's now a business ombudsman in Ukraine. He joins me now from Kyiv. Thank you very much for joining us today. I want to start with, what are your expectations in this moment?
My expectations are very low. As regards the Ukraine track, what we see is a relationship building visit, a kind of backslapping, get in the backseat of my car kind of visit, and not a count on America to be firm in the interests of a country that's been attacked by Russia.
Okay, so you brought that. I totally want to ask you about this. There was the moment where we saw when Vladimir Putin got off the plane, it was a literal red carpet rollout. Donald Trump applauded as Vladimir Putin made his way to him. They shook hands, they smiled, and then they got in the same vehicle, the president's armored security vehicle known as the Beast. And you could see a giant smile on Vladimir Putin's face as they drove away. When you watched all of that, what did you think?
I thought, oh boy, or at least in terms that I can express on a family news network. Because, of course, the Russian president's car had also been flown in. And Katie, I think those of us who've been at a lot of summit meetings know that these things are generally very carefully choreographed. But I think this was a kind of spontaneous bro-to-bro gesture by President Trump.
So what kind of message does this send to Ukraine?
We, the big boys, are riding around in our big car. You're not here. And, it's pursuing peace. Peace is a fleeting sort of thing, I guess. That's the logo there. But it looks like it's really about rebooting Russian-American bilateral relations with Ukraine as kind of a pretext, and likely to be thrown under, if not a bus, then a limo.
In the hours leading up to this meeting, Russia launched another series of attacks on Ukraine, at least one of them being deadly. You're in Kyiv. I'm wondering what you can tell us about how people are feeling there right now.
Apprehensive, anxious, afraid of being abandoned, but not prepared to simply give up. I think there were 3 ballistic missile alerts this past evening here in Kyiv. None of them hit the capital. I think the Russians realize that the American administration's current sense of geography is limited to the city of Kyiv in Ukraine. And so if something hits Kyiv, then it's noticed. If it hits other lesser known cities, it kind of just goes by the by. So that's what they've been doing. For the past week, there have been no big attacks targeting the capital, but other parts of the country have been walloped.
So you are Canada's former ambassador to Ukraine. I'm curious, if you were in that role still in this moment, what would you be doing as this takes place?
I would be, I think, reaching out to my contacts, trying to get their perceptions, trying to ensure what the sort of Canadian view of what's going on here should be. I think the additional sort of irony from the Canadian point of view is that President Putin is getting a much nicer treatment, both in tariff terms and in ride in my limo terms, than our very own prime minister, or for that matter, any allied leader has in the past 6 months. So this is really quite remarkable.
What do you think is that is a remarkable point, and I want to talk to you about that sort of in a moment. But what do you think the Canadian sort of role is in this moment? What should Canada be doing to contribute to either the conversation or is there new action Canada could take to deal with whatever is going to come out of this?
Well, depending on what does come out of it, and I have the feeling that because of President Trump's love for the dramatic, and he did, tweet out the all caps words "high stakes" earlier in the day, that there is going to be some sort of announcement, and it's going to on Ukraine, and it's going to make Ukraine and its friends very uncomfortable. So there will come a moment when the European allies and our own prime minister, all those people who were on the big Zoom conference with President Trump 2 days ago, are going to have to decide if all their persuasive efforts were in vain, and that they in fact have to pursue a different policy from that of the Americans. So, I mean, if things diverge that much, then the prime minister will have a choice to make. Do I stick with the people I joined in this coalition of the willing, or do I align with whatever it is that will be said at the Twin Podium in Anchorage?
You mentioned this just a moment ago, but there is a distinct difference in the way that Donald Trump is having this interaction, at least publicly, with Vladimir Putin versus what we saw in the Oval Office with that breakdown between Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What do you make of the contrast you are seeing there?
I think in part, and you saw the fly past, the two big airplanes. So this is really like the big boys getting together, and you've got a big plane, I've got a big plane, you got nukes, I got nukes. Others don't. They haven't got cards. But that, I think, in part reflects an over sort of fascination with boys and toys, and doesn't factor in things like political will, which is what powers Ukraine's defense against Russia, and the interests of a whole bunch of medium-sized countries, which is basically what the allies of the US are. So at the moment, they're in their kind of little wonderland. And you could say, yes, but they're the only people who count. But I think that would be by far an oversimplification. And so we'll just see how this all plays out.
I know you set expectations very low for anything in terms of something that could come out of this that might sort of help Ukraine or get closer to peace. And I'm wondering, when you look at what's going on right now, is there any sort of realistic best case scenario that you're sort of envisioning?
So my low expectation best case scenario would be that some combination of promised economic cooperation persuades Putin to accept ceasefire first, work out details later, which might give Ukraine then a chance to actually have a meaningful three-way summit later with both Putin and Trump. But the Canadian in me says, what if that's achieved at the expense of carving up the Arctic between Russia and the US at the expense of Canada? So generally speaking, all this carving is not good for middle powers.
And is that what you'll be watching for going forward, about what that impact could possibly be for Canada too?
As well, yeah, I think because the world that is being set up with the big planes and the big bros is not one that is comfortable for countries like Canada.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you. We'll check in with you again soon. Thank you, Roman Waschuk, the former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine.
You're very welcome.
Coming up, we'll get the view from Washington, D.C. with the CBC's Cameron McIntosh. We are watching the ongoing meetings in Alaska where U.S. President Donald Trump is in discussions with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump spoke to reporters earlier today from Air Force One.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing.
Trump says he believes strong progress will be made, and that will lead to a second meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump's critics, though, say the meeting serves no purpose other than to legitimize Putin. Cameron McIntosh is in Washington for us this evening, following everything along. Cam, what is the expectation of the Trump administration in these meetings?
Well, you know, it's a good question, Katie, and it seems to be a moving target. Over the course of the last several days, President Trump, in a way that really maybe only he can, has both lowered expectations and raised them. And here's what I mean by that. Over the last couple of days, at least, he's been talking about this as a listening meeting, a chance to kind of feel out the Russian position. Today, this morning, though, he raised the stakes a bit. He had a single post on his social media site on Truth Social, 2 words: high stakes, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. So that coming from the self-professed master negotiator. Now, Trump certainly didn't go to Alaska alone. He's got a delegation with him. Other people are in the room with him right now, as the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who actually met with Putin last week as all this was being put into motion. Several cabinet members are also there, including Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Now, that could be significant for a couple of reasons. The Russians are casting this as a meeting not so much about Ukraine, but about a reset in relations and a new economic relationship. Trump is also threatening Russia with sanctions. Lutnick would have a hand in either circumstance. So that's an interest. The economic aspect of this is something to watch. It was that threat of sanctions that got Putin to make the phone call to the United States to set this meeting up in the first place. Now, earlier today, Trump did put a marker down. He said he wants an unconditional ceasefire today. Otherwise, he would put those sanctions on Russia. He also said that he would know how the meeting was going or what the possibilities were by just being with Putin for a few minutes. And, you know, right now, they're still in the room. So is this going well? We don't really know. We won't know until both men get out. At one point, Donald Trump was also saying that he's willing to walk out of the room, and it doesn't appear that he's done that.
A senior White House staffer, a man named Dan Scavino, just put out a tweet saying the meeting is still going on at this point. The trilateral meet or the 3-on-3 meeting is still going on. So that's as of 5:25 p.m. Eastern time. So it's still going. We know that much. So it doesn't appear that they're walking out at this point. Cam, how are Americans feeling about the conflict as Trump looks to broker some kind of peace?
Yeah, Katie, I can tell you all day we've been watching those podiums and we've been watching the feeds coming out of there, trying to parse any hint of what's happening or what the tone is in there. As for the feelings of Americans, there has been some polling done on that recently. In fact, a poll released today. There are no American boots on the ground in Ukraine, but American tax dollars have been financing Ukrainians' defense. An estimated $174 billion has been spent on Ukraine defense here in the United States. Now, a lot of that money is spent in America buying American weapons to send to Ukraine. Still, there is a real fatigue in this country with financing and fighting foreign wars. And there's political pressure on Trump, particularly within the Republican Party, to see an end to this. So Trump is getting that pressure. There's also polling that's been done there's been polling done that right now indicates only about 53% of Americans actually see Ukraine as a responsibility for the U.S. There's also been polling done in Ukraine and in the U.S. that indicates that faith in Donald Trump to fix this or end this is quite low. Still, the fact of the matter remains, he is the man in the room right now talking to the Russian president. There are fears in Ukraine and Europe, of course, that Trump may come up with some sort of a deal here that basically awards Russian aggression and leaves Ukraine vulnerable. Still, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who Trump has promised to call immediately after this meeting, posting today that everything is riding on American strength. For years now, Donald Trump has been saying he is the only person that can solve Ukraine. He's the only person that can bring an end to this war. And he certainly has the political motivations to do it. There's global pressure on him. There's domestic pressure on him. And he also has personal aspirations. As you know, Katie, he has made it well known he would like a Nobel Peace Prize.
He certainly has. Okay, Cameron McIntosh in Washington, thank you.
Pleasure.
So how do we make sense of what's happened so far? Let's ask Keir Giles, a senior consulting fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. He joins us again today after speaking with us yesterday. I want to start by asking you, what are your thoughts on what you've seen unfold so far?
Well, it's a very depressing spectacle, of course. You have the convicted felon greeting the internationally wanted war criminal warmly and obviously having an animated and close personal conversation. And then, of course, bringing him into the presidential limo to the horror and consternation of every counterintelligence professional that has commented on it so far, previously as super secure space. The agenda for this meeting seems to be shifting on the fly, very much like, as you heard from Cameron a moment ago, the way what Donald Trump is saying he wants out of it is shifting. That one-to-one conversation that was supposed to be happening just with the interpreters has turned into a 3+3. The Russians seem to be driving the agenda at the moment, setting how long it will be, apparently vetoing some members of the US delegation because they were too friendly to Ukraine. So it's all in the air at the moment. And Cameron did suggest a moment ago that we would only hear what's really happened when they come out of the room. I suspect it might be a bit later than that, because if past performance is anything to go by, when they do come out, the US and the Russian readouts of what has happened are likely to be very different. And we may well see the same kind of train crash press conference as we had the last time these people met under these circumstances in Helsinki in 2018. But the real fallout, the real impact, and who it affects around the world might only become clearer much later.
I want to ask you about Helsinki in a moment, but can you explain to our audience why it is such a significant thing when Vladimir Putin got into the presidential limo, it's called the Beast, with Donald Trump? They were there was someone driving, but we were told by the pool reporters who are on the ground that the White House confirmed it was just the two of them in the back there. Why is that significant?
There are so many different reasons why this has rung alarm bells and put the hairs up on the backs of people's necks. First of all, it's unsupervised alone time between these two people, and who knows what they're discussing. There'll be no record of it. There'll be no way of understanding exactly what it is that they are agreeing between themselves. Second, the counterintelligence issues. This is supposed to be a highly secure space, and the speculation at the moment is that even if Donald Trump is not bragging to Vladimir Putin about the secure and secret features of this secure presidential space, then who knows what exactly Vladimir Putin might be learning about it through his own means of snooping out exactly what's going on there. So it's a way in which the US security apparatus has been opened up to Russia, and it's just a symptom, really, of the other ways in which defenses have been stood down to the ways in which Russia likes to attack the United States ever since Donald Trump took office.
You mentioned the Helsinki summit. That's from back in 2018, and I wanted to ask you about that. Is there anything we can learn from that summit? And I'm thinking of how when those two leaders emerged, it came at a time where Donald Trump stood at a podium and he said he believed Vladimir Putin when he denied that Russia was involved with trying to interfere in the 2016 election. That was against what American intelligence agencies had concluded. Donald Trump was siding with the Russians over American intelligence agencies. When you look at that outing, is there any sort of lessons learned or any sort of analysis we can take from that and apply it to what's happening right now?
Well, absolutely. There were a lot of lessons that were observed, but plainly not learned, because the primary lesson was don't let Donald Trump alone in a room with Vladimir Putin, because the results are likely to be disastrous. But here they are again. And that, of course, runs counter to all of the advice from all of the Russia professionals who previously might have been advising a U.S. head of state, but now, of course, have been dismissed, have been purged in favor of people who, like Trump, are moving towards a partnership with Russia without apparently seeing Russia as a threat to the United States, despite the fact that for Moscow, the United States is still the main enemy.
There are no indications at this point that Vladimir Putin wants to stop his attacks on Ukraine. Hours before the meeting began, we did see Russia launch fresh, deadly attacks. So if peace is not sort of his objective here, what does Russia actually want out of this?
Well, as you heard from Cameron just a few minutes ago, there are much broader objectives that Russia has apparently come to this meeting for. The supposed topic was Ukraine, but you have all of the economic advisors in the room. You have these suggestions from Russia that there are other aspirations that Moscow wants that are on the table for discussion. Cameron mentioned, your previous guest, Roman Vashchuk, was talking about the implications of potential partnership between the United States and Russia in the Arctic for countries like Canada. From a European perspective, it's what they might agree about the future of Europe that is at stake. And while Donald Trump can't prescribe exactly how Ukraine is going to behave itself in this war, he can certainly influence the future of continents by moving US security positions and changing exactly who they are going to protect and from whom.
If you were in Ukraine right now, and when you think about what Volodymyr Zelensky might be thinking in this moment, what should the Ukrainians be taking away by the display they've seen so far?
Well, this should come as no surprise in Ukraine itself. And in fact, that's the feedback we've been hearing from so many Ukrainians, a kind of weary resignation to the fact that this is happening over their heads and without Ukrainian involvement. But at the same time, Ukraine has had a long time to get ready to this moment. It was very clear what Donald Trump would do when he came to office and what the implications were for Ukraine, for Europe, and for other countries around the world. So much so that in the middle of last year, I wrote a book describing exactly the situation we are in now, because it was so obvious what Donald Trump was going to present as a problem in tandem with Putin. So all of this time, Ukraine has been preparing for this moment and reducing its dependence on the United States, getting more support from Europe, getting this rapid development of its own domestic defense industries, so that if and when the time comes when the United States does try to cut Ukraine loose and put leverage on Kyiv to try to get them to agree to whatever it is that Moscow wants, Ukraine is in a position, hopefully, to stand on its own 2 feet.
This is not the kind of thing where predictions are particularly relevant because, you know, there are so many unexpected things that could happen. And given what we're dealing with, who's in the room right now. But what are you going to be watching for when Trump and Putin emerge if they head to the podiums to hold this joint press conference as expected?
I have absolutely no expectations. As we discussed a few minutes ago, the fact that they are still in there means that all of these threats of Trump that if he was going to walk out, that if he didn't think the meeting was on track, he was going to walk out early, for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. But we've no way at all of telling what kind of mood they're both going to come out in. We've seen the pictures of Putin grinning from ear to ear throughout the whole of their arrival and their going into the summit. We'll see if that's the same on the way out. If so, it's bound to be bad news for all of us.
Is there any scenario where you think that perhaps there could be something positive that comes out of this, or is it just danger red flags all over the place?
We shouldn't rule out completely that there might be some kind of progress or some kind of settlement. But again, we should remember that it was the worst case scenario that is now being discussed. For over 3 years, the unconditional ceasefire was what Ukraine and Ukraine's backers in Europe was trying to resist, because it cements Russian control over those occupied territories, and it gives Russia the breathing space to rebuild its military, to have another go, while legitimizing exactly what they've done. But yet, because of the change in policy from the United States, this is now not the worst case outcome, but one of the least worst, and that's why it's being endorsed by Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, what might actually be taken, what steps might be taken toward that in the room at the moment, we can't tell, but there is no reason to think that Putin sees it in his interest to stop the war at the moment. And that, of course, is just a symptom of the way the objectives of the two sides going into this conversation are so very different. Once again, it's always the case that it is the Western powers that want to stop the war and stop the fighting, and it is Russia that actually wants to win the war and sees ceasefire negotiations as a means of achieving its war aims rather than a means of stopping the bloodshed.
All right, Keir Giles, a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House, thank you for speaking with us 2 days in a row. We greatly appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Coming up, former ambassador to the United Nations, Louise Blais, on the international community, how it is perceiving this summit. At this hour, U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting to talk about Russia's war on Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Reporters shouting questions at the two leaders there, but neither said a thing in those final moments before the doors closed and the face-to-face began. Louise Blais is the former Canadian Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN. She joins us now. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to start by asking, based on everything you've seen so far, what's your biggest takeaway at this point?
Well, hello, Katie. It's great to see you. Great to be on the show again. Look, it's really, we were prepared. We knew that the president of Russia was coming on American soil, but the staging of it did surprise me. The red carpet, the limo ride, your previous guests have outlined, while that's just so shocking in a way. So the warmth of the welcome, I think, does surprise me. I think it's one thing to meet an adversary and an aggressor in a war that you have helped fund the other side. Let's face it, the Americans have been on the Ukraine side. It is an odd paradox, an odd contrast to just have that warmth and treating the president of Russia as a sort of a hero coming on American soil. So that's my big takeaway. We're going to see how the meeting goes, but so far, I mean, if you're sitting in Europe, you're in Ukraine, you're looking at that and you're going, oh boy.
Given the roles that you've had in the past in your area of expertise, I'm wondering if you could walk us through what you think Canadian officials who are watching this right now, what the conversations are like behind the scenes as they try to get as much information as they can or think about what they've seen so far. What will the Canadians be talking about and doing in this moment?
Well, the Canadian side is obviously watching closely. Everyone is calling their sources, and we are in moments like this, we do depend on the media. You're there, you're represented on the ground, and we follow feeds, and we have those relationships that would give us any sense of what is going on. But really, at the end of the day, we have to wait. We have to wait and see what will be disclosed publicly. I think there will be a lot there. Will they come out together? Will there be the joint conference that's planned? So I think right now everyone's waiting to really hear the official account of the discussion. Of course, we'll never know what was said in the limousine, but otherwise they are accompanied, and there'll be a sort of an official readout.
In the lead up to this meeting, NATO allies did hold conversations with Trump himself, as well as senior officials at the White House. I'm wondering why those conversations were so key and what it is those NATO allies were trying to really drill down with Trump and other U.S. officials heading into this meeting.
Well, I think they were really trying to caution the president in accepting conditions that would be unacceptable. And they really did try to remind him. They all know that with Donald Trump, it's important. You have to keep repeating. You have to come back. He will weigh things. He does listen. And he did make comments come after those calls that were reassuring, but they're already a couple of days ago, many hours ago. But I think they were important, and some of the message that were sent was Zelensky and Ukraine have to be at the table. They have to be part and parcel to any negotiation, any real negotiation, and that really, when it comes to territorial integrity, we've got to stand firm. And it's not to say there's not going to have to be some aspects of that will be looked at, but it has to be done in a very, very careful and well evaluated fashion that will really make sure that Russia doesn't get that corridor that they want so badly to get to Crimea and to the Black Sea. So there's got to be this. It was important to get those conversations. They were cordial. The president listened, and so now they're waiting to see how much of that he took on.
After this latest sort of when Vladimir Putin, launched the most recent attack on Ukraine, when he restarted the war in 2022, he seized Crimea in 2014, and then escalated attacks again in 2022, leading to the situation we're in today. At that time, there was a united response from NATO allies, from the United States, Canada, part of that. Started with sanctions, continued on with weapons and aid support, trying to get whatever they needed into Ukraine. At this point, it seems to have at times slowed the Russian advances. They were not able to take the Ukrainian capital. But we're now at this point where Russia appears absolutely not deterred. They're launching attacks on the morning of this summit, where the goal from U.S. President Donald Trump is to stop the killing hours before Russia launches an attack and there is killing in Ukraine. At this point, given the international response, do you think that it needs to change or shift as Russia is not deterred in this moment?
Well, clearly, no, Russia will not be deterred, and that's clear. And you get the sense that it's quite possible that, the president of Russia has nothing to lose with this summit. Either he angers Trump and makes him feel that this will go nowhere. And we know that the president has a sort of a short attention span. And it's possible that he just gets tired of trying to be the mediator, of trying to get peace and that he's expending way too much political capital, and walks away and becomes disinterested. And of course, that would be a win for the president of Russia, because then he would have unfettered access. Yes, it's true that Europe and Canada can help, but really the Americans' armament is absolutely essential in this. So, and if he does get the president to lay up on sanctions and to give in on some of his conditions on related to Ukrainian territory, then that's a win too. So really, at this point, from the perspective of Russia, there really wasn't anything to lose by coming today. They've already had some wins just by the staging. But I will add that it really is, you were setting up the segment by saying how the international community was reacting. If you're Modi in India today, you're going, what is going on? You America have applied tariffs on us because we import Russian oil, and there you are with your trade team potentially negotiating some aspects to the economic relationship with the Russian Federation. So there's a lot of mixed messages that are going on, and we know that the President Putin is going to be traveling to China at the end of the month, early September, for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so you have to really look at how is China looking at what is going on, what will come out of these negotiations. Everyone's watching, and there's a lot of mixed signals that are being sent by the Americans.
Mixed signals seems to be a real hallmark of what we've seen at times from the Trump administration. I'm wondering, when you sort of take a step back and you look at this moment, could you have ever imagined we'd be in this scenario where, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin are again having some alone time, even if it's brief, and how the world is sort of watching and waiting to see what's going to come out of this with two leaders? And Vladimir Putin, at least we generally know what his MO is and how he operates and what his goals are. And you've got the American president, who is just very unpredictable. What do you make of this moment we're living through?
Well, I mean, you've used the word. I mean, it is unpredictable. And then this unpredictability, it's not to say that it's all going to be negative. It's possible that there is a world in which the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is perhaps the one person that can get us out of this impasse. This has not gone unnoticed. It's by European leaders. There's a chance. It's a small chance, but there is a chance that we can get a breakthrough. I wouldn't totally dismiss it. It's unlikely, but it could happen. So it is a high risk, high stake moment. And I don't think I would have seen the level of welcome that has been given to Vladimir Putin. I mean, he has come to the United States in the past. He's come to the UN, but to have this red carpet, have it be this warm, having the President of the United States applaud as he's coming his way, I mean, that did send a signal. But on the other hand, this is the way that Donald Trump works. He's thinking, I'm going to give him something so that I can get something in return. Let's, and I think Canada should maybe take a little bit of a lesson in here and how the president likes to be treated. And this is what the treatment that he's given an adversary that he's trying to get something out of.
And that's a point that the White House often likes to make. They point to Donald Trump to getting these conversations going in the first place, saying that there's a much more aggressive push to try to get to a peace. However, the positions between the Republicans in the United States and the Democrats and the Biden administration at points, it certainly is not exactly on par. But the White House continues to make the point that they see Donald Trump as someone who's trying to get the logjam through, try to get this sort of moving and get toward a peace. Louise, last question to you. What are you looking for next?
Well, let's see what they come out with today. I think what we're looking at next is that tripartite meeting, and obviously they've positioned it to have Zelensky be the sort of the third wheel. He's not going to go into that as an equal partner. It's not out of the question that would be delegated down by the president to some degree and by both presidents, but I don't think so. I think President Trump wants to be at the center of any peace agreement. I mean, it's been said before, it's something that he cares about. So we'll have to wait and see. But that is the next step, and unless something really goes wrong today.
Okay, Louise Blais, a former Canadian Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN. Thanks for your time.
No, thank you for having me, Katie.
We have got lots more to come on Power and Politics. We'll hear how Ukrainian Canadians are feeling about this meeting, and we'll speak to a former Canadian ambassador to Russia, Jeremy Kinsman. Welcome back to Power and Politics. You're looking live right now at the room where it is going to happen. That is where U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, they will be standing behind those podiums. At least that's the plan, to come out and hold a joint news conference once all of the meetings that are happening behind the scenes are done. They have been meeting at this point for just over 2.5 hours now. Part of the conversation is around Russia's war in Ukraine, but we do know, based on sort of the guest list, that perhaps that conversation might not necessarily just be focused on the current conflict in Ukraine, Russia's attack on Ukraine. But the summit is being held right now in Anchorage, Alaska, and that is where we find the CBC's Lindsay Duncombe. Lindsay, what's the latest on the ground there?
You know, I caught those Hamilton lyric reference right off the top there, Katie. You can't get a show tune past me.
Just for you.
But certainly, yeah, we talk about a spectacle, and that is what we saw earlier today when Vladimir Putin landed at the Air Force Base here and was greeted with the red carpet, with the shared limo ride, with the handshakes. We saw how friendly it was when the Russian president landed. We do not know how friendly things are behind the scenes as we go now into the third hour of these discussions. As you mentioned, this is happening in two parts, right? There's the part where there is the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, as well as the special envoy to Ukraine that will be joining Russian counterparts and both presidents. So presumably that's when the tough issues around ending the war in Ukraine will be discussed. Donald Trump has said that he is not there to speak on behalf of Ukraine, but rather sees this as an opening to perhaps further discussions. One of the things that Russia wants, besides the photo op that it got really welcoming Russia back onto the international scene after years in isolation as a result of the war, is, of course, economic relief. And the fact that there will be economic secretaries and advisors in the second part of the meetings indicates that something such as business deals or sanctions could indeed be discussed. But that will not happen, according to President Donald Trump, until they get through the issue of Ukraine and any progress towards a ceasefire. The other thing we're watching here, Katie, is there are small protests around Anchorage. We saw them yesterday and again today. Our producer, Georgie Smythe, she is out in the middle of all of that. They are unfolding one of the largest Ukrainian flags. A lot of this is happening near the entrances to the Air Force Base. There are people who fled the war in Ukraine and who are living here in Alaska. This is an incredibly difficult time for them. And some of the people we spoke to, we really heard a mixture of opinions from people who live here in Anchorage. Many people frustrated that this summit is happening without Vladimir Zelensky, and others just hopeful for any kind of peace, however it happens.
And Lindsay, as we're having this conversation right now, we know that as Donald Trump was making his way to Alaska, he sat down for an interview with Brett Baer of Fox News. We're just starting to get some red alerts across the wire system about what it is that Trump told Fox News. It's a lot of it is similar to what we've heard Trump say in the past, saying that they will have another meeting if the conversation works out. He expects another meeting would happen very soon. If he has to do sanctions against Russia, they will do it. But he says, maybe I wouldn't have to do it. So it's a lot of the lines that we often hear from Trump saying maybe, maybe not. But that's just the latest on what's coming across the wires. But you've been speaking with people who are at the summit, as well as other journalists. What have they been telling you?
You know, it is really interesting to be in this room full of journalists from all over the world and many from Europe. And I spoke to a public broadcaster, a reporter from Estonia, and she spoke about the nervousness that people in that country feel, given that it is a small country, a little more than 1 million people, shares a border with Russia. As a result of the war in Ukraine, it's a country that has boosted its defense spending to more than 5%, and a lot of nervousness there as they watch what comes out of this. Here's what she had to say to me.
It's going to affect our future as well, what's happening today. We do share a border with Russia. We're a teeny tiny nation. Luckily, we are in European Union and we are in NATO, so that's our hope. But today, yeah, I guess our biggest fear is that there's going to be a deal behind Ukraine's back, which means our biggest hope is there is not going to be any deal today.
Sharing that hope are the journalists here from Ukraine. I asked the Ukrainian journalist who's standing not far from where I am how she felt when she saw those images, the friendly images between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin arriving here in Anchorage. And she said she just had two words. She said, "It hurts."
Lindsay Duncombe in Anchorage, Alaska. Thank you, Lindsay, for your reporting. Okay, joining me now, let's bring in our next guest. It's Senator Peter Beam. Previously, you have such a unique experience. Before you became a senator, you are one of the most senior diplomats that Canada has ever sort of experienced, and you have seen these leaders up close behind the scenes. I have a million questions I want to ask you, but I want to start very broadly with, what are your takeaways from what you've seen so far? I know that you came with notes, so I want to hear what it is you're taking away in this moment.
Well, thank you, Katie. I too have been in the room where it happened, and sometimes in a room where nothing at all happened. So these talks are going on at length. It is not Vladimir Putin's first rodeo in terms of meetings with a U.S. president. He's met with 5. This is his second one with Donald Trump. He met Donald Trump in 2018 in Helsinki. Mm-hmm. So he is quite experienced at these things. It's already a win for him in that he has reduced his pariah status, even though the bombs are still falling on Kyiv and on Ukraine. And he can walk away from this and say, okay, I was there. I did my best. I'm being accepted as a peer again. And he could probably agree to a ceasefire as well if he's pressed hard enough and gets some concessions on other things. The question would be how to enforce that and to see what the next step would be. And as you said, Donald Trump likes to say one thing and then another thing, and might say the last thing that he was briefed on because he doesn't carry a brief very well, in my experience. Mm-hmm. So we'll just have to see as the evening drags on.
You have experience up close and personal with both Vladimir Putin as well as Donald Trump. I'm wondering if you can walk us through, what you've learned from your experience as you're basically Canada's lead at these G8 and G7 summits. The role is technically called a Sherpa, but you are the lead for Canada when it comes to the organization, what is going to happen, everything. Can we start with your experience with Vladimir Putin and what you've seen and what you've learned that might apply to this moment?
I was Prime Minister Harper's Sherpa at the very last G8 summit that took place in Northern Ireland in 2013. Mr. Putin was there. Normally at these summits, the dinner, in the past at least, has been a discussion on foreign policy issues. And Putin dominated that conversation. In particular, talking about Syria and what a good guy President Assad was. And afterwards, the other leaders, and particularly President Obama, looked around and they said, well, this was not very helpful to us. I did have a conversation with President Putin afterwards in German. It's a language we have in common. And we talked a little bit about that, but not much else. And then, of course, after that, Russia went took Crimea mm-hmm. and the Donbass, and Mr. Harper in particular worked very hard to change the arithmetic on the G8 to make it a G7, which we did in The Hague on the margins of a nuclear security summit. I was a Sherpa for that too.
If I remember correctly, was it not then Prime Minister Stephen Harper who told Vladimir Putin directly, get out of Ukraine, and that was sort of a part of a big moment leading toward having the G8 go from being a G8 to the G7?
That was not at that event. I think it was a G20 summit in Australia.
Australia, that was the one.
I think so. But yeah, I think the Canadian view has been pretty strong all the way through, no matter who has sat in the Prime Minister's chair.
So that is your experience with Vladimir Putin and what he sort of liked to deal with behind the scenes. I know you also have experience with U.S. President Donald Trump. Yes. What can you tell us about that and that might apply to, what we might know about what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, the experience there was in 2017, the summit in Italy, in Taormina. That was the first one that President Trump attended. But the real experience was the following year in Charlevoix, which is still etched into my PTSD memory. And there, the president was not really that focused on the discussion. He was more focused on a meeting he was going to have with Kim Jong-un a few days later, the North Korean leader, in Singapore. And he had asked me about flag and other placement, and I said I was not a protocolary expert. So he then again turned to his people. One thing he did say there, and he said it again in the Kananaskis context in June, was that Vladimir Putin should be at the table. And we found that rather odd because Prime Minister Theresa May of the UK was sitting there, and there had just been a big poisoning by Russian security services in Salisbury. So there was some tone deafness there. But Mr. Trump says what he wants to say.
Mr. Trump, President Trump has repeated that he thinks it was a mistake to kick Russia out of the G8. He said that recently, and even despite what has gone on with the most recent military action in Ukraine. Given that context going into this moment, what do you make of what is at stake in these conversations in particular?
Well, I think what President Trump wants to do is to position the U.S., and of course he has a commercial economic delegation with him as well, where that will lead, whether it's deals on critical minerals and the like, we don't know. It is certainly clear from what he said before going that land swapping was not there, after he said it could be. And of course this is what makes the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky very nervous. So there is that aspect. On the other hand, Putin too is feeling the pressure. The Ukrainians are striking critical Russian infrastructure. They have developed drone warfare to quite an extent, and you have to give them all credit for doing that. And economic sanctions on India, secondary sanctions on taking Russian oil, that could be a very, very big factor. The Russian economy is on a war footing, which is why it hasn't shrunk. But the question is, how long can it stay on that war footing when you've had close to 1 million, if not over 1 million casualties, just in terms of grinding forward for a few kilometers of land in the Donbass?
Because so much of your experience has to do with the Canadian diplomatic, perspective. In this moment, what should Canadians watching this be watching for and thinking about when it comes to sort of the Canadian angle here?
Okay, for Canada, we're a middle power, but per capita, we have been the largest contributor to the effort in Ukraine. So about over $20 billion. Yeah. 4.5 billion of that military and related, the rest economic assistance of one kind or another. So our commitment is clearly there. And coincidentally, Canada still has the G7 presidency until the end of the calendar year. So if Prime Minister Carney wants to convene leaders again, whether it's in a virtual call, or Foreign Minister Anand wants to have a discussion with her counterparts in the wake of this, that would be an interesting move to make, recognizing that Friedrich Merz, the Germans, Emmanuel Macron, France, they have particular interests as well. But they're all in touch, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that call with President Trump 2 days ago was very, very important.
I want to ask you more about that in just 1 second. We want to put up a live shot right now. I believe we're getting signals that the actual press conference with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin might be happening soon. If the control room wants to get me in my ear, did we get a 1 minute warning? Did we? No. Okay. No, we did not. We did not get that 1 minute warning. But we are starting to see activity there on the ground. We're getting some indication that things could be happening soon. So if I interrupt you, Senator Beam, the only reason I'm interrupting you is because we're going to go live to whatever we're going to see happen there. Yeah, we're just getting an alert across the wire. The 3-on-3 talks between Trump and his two officials, Witkoff and Marco Rubio, and Putin and his Russian advisors as well, his close members of his inner circle, that have now concluded after more than 2.5 hours. So we are just waiting to see if they're both going to walk out there, and we'll have live coverage as we go from there. But the last thing, you made that point about Canada, having the presidency of the G7 in this moment. Can you just explain, sort of again, I know you just made this case, but why this is so significant in this moment, given all of the tension around this?
Well, it means that theoretically we could convene meetings, whether it's finance ministers, foreign ministers, others, or leaders. Now, to an extent, Merz and Macron are doing that as well. But there is an opportunity there because you have the whole apparatus across and below in the Government of Canada that is still geared up and working for this, as we were till the end of 2018, for example, the last time around.
Last thing I want to ask you, looking ahead, what are you going to be watching for when we sort of start to see what comes out of here? What are you looking for possible signs of maybe a breakthrough, maybe something positive?
Well, I think a breakthrough would be at least some sort of a ceasefire. How it's administered, who knows? But then if there is going to be a second step, as President Trump has suggested, then I think President Zelensky has to be at the table. And I think there has to be very close coordination with the Europeans and ourselves.
Okay, Senator Beam, thank you for your time today. Thanks, okay, we are going to keep our eyes on what's going on in Anchorage, Alaska right now, and of course, as soon as we get any sort of indication that the leaders may come out, but we can confirm that the 3-on-3 meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin that has wrapped up, and we are now seeing all of the people taking their place for this press conference. We will continue to monitor that, but until that happens, coming up, we do have the head of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress on what Kyiv is watching for out of this meeting. Stay with us. We continue with the developing summit happening in Alaska right now. We are getting some indication from American officials, at least, that perhaps this news conference, where we are expecting U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin to stand side by side at those podiums, that it could get underway soon. We don't have any more specifics other than soon. The press team has sort of assembled there. There are dozens and dozens of journalists in that room, in their seats, all hoping to get some questions in there. But that is where we are expecting any moment now we could have U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin take their spots and start taking questions from the press. So far, there have been a couple of opportunities where both leaders have been in front of reporters. A number of questions were shouted at Russian President Vladimir Putin, including one, will you stop killing civilians? He did not answer the question. He pointed to the ear, sort of suggesting that he could not hear what was said. A number of questions were also asked when they're inside a room with the 3-on-3 meeting that has just wrapped up now after 2.5 hours. But the questions were directed mostly at Putin, and again, he didn't answer there. So again, we are continuing to monitor this situation. The minute it begins, of course, we will cut to it immediately. In the meantime, we are joined now by Ihor Mikolchichin. He is the CEO and the executive director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, joining us now here in studio. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm starting our conversations with all the guests today is, given what you've seen so far, what stands out to you from the perspective of a Ukrainian Canadian?
I think the image we'll all see on the newspapers tomorrow morning, and that image of these two friendly men coming in the red carpet and sharing a limo ride. I think that was really jarring to me, to our community who are watching this. We've seen Putin indicted by the International Criminal Court. We know that this is the man who's orchestrated an invasion and genocidal war, frankly, and to have an American president welcome that kind of a person on American soil in that way is really jarring.
What are your biggest concerns in this moment? Do you have any hope that perhaps this can be the starting point for some kind of plan to peace?
I mean, we all hope that there will be peace, but I think our perspective, my perspective, having watched how Russia operates, how Putin operates, is that there isn't a high chance of that he has steadfastly ignored any warning or ceasefire pressure by the Americans. He, prior to 2022 invasion, pretended to play diplomatic games with the West and with others and with Ukraine. So I don't think that Russia has a great track record on delivering anything in a diplomatic negotiation, and they didn't put any signals out that they were going to come to this meeting and make any concessions. We were expecting that this is going to be an opportunity for him to rant and rave, and on his, literally back to the USSR moment, that Ukraine is not a state and it's not real, and all of these kind of tropes that he's been talking about. So, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see what he says. I think that the brave reporters who were yelling at him have it right, that this is a man who's overseeing kidnapping and murder of children, and he's pretending to, be something he's not.
You sort of mentioned back to the USSR. There are some not so subtle signals Russia was sending before the meeting. First of all, the first thing we have to acknowledge is the deadly attacks in Ukraine that took place in the hours before. Second, Sergei Lavrov, who is the foreign minister, I believe our control room has this video. It's coming, so we'll put it up on screen in just a second. We have this video of Sergei Lavrov, who is the Russian foreign minister. He's wearing a sweatshirt that says CCCP, which is USSR. It's literally USSR. We're told by American reporters who have been in contact with their Russian spokesperson that apparently on the plane, the Russian delegation was served chicken Kiev for dinner or for lunch, like as a meal. These are not subtle things.
No, these are not mistakes. These are not.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah, this is all part of the, I would say, almost mockery of a negotiation process of the kind of, it's a showcasing of bravado I think, unfortunately, the result of all this is that Russia is no longer isolated, right? Putin has his photo op with the American president. The pressure will now be, Trump was talking about having him at the G8 and other, venues. And the isolation and the all the efforts that have been made to isolate Russian officials and the leadership are now crumbling away, and that's the biggest win that Russia has today.
And you know what? Speaking of sort of wins, they're not going to the press conference just yet, but I just want to let you know we're getting sort of alerts on our news wire system. And according to the Russian side of things, a Russian spokesman, a Kremlin spokesman, says on the meeting, they describe it, this is from the Russian side, the talks between Putin and Trump went, quote, remarkably well. So that is, at least in this initial moment, what the spin from Russia is coming out of this. I know that we are going to get a lot of information in sort of the hours and the days to come. Oftentimes when these kinds of events happen, the readouts from the Americans and the Russians sort of like describing what happened, oftentimes they are very, very different. But I want to ask you, you talk about, the way that the signals Russia is sending in the lead up to this meeting, also the certain mockery or the trolling. As a Ukrainian watching this happen, like, how are you feeling?
Like we've seen it many times before. I mean, that's why I don't think that Ukraine and Ukrainians are surprised by any of this. This is a repeat of the same plot that has been repeated many times. The kind of bravado, the mockery, the intimidation that Putin's done with other world leaders, like Angela Merkel and other, all of that stuff is true. I don't, for Ukraine, this is about a peace, a ceasefire, and recognizing the fact that Russia is occupying and illegally invaded the country, and that's not going to be addressed, I don't think, by this press conference. Trump sometimes says these things and sometimes recognizes that literally every day missiles are hitting Ukrainian civilians and killing them. And then sometimes we're off on another tangent and we're making deals and we're talking about, sort of almost alternate reality. But I would say anything that Russian state media is reporting, I would take that with a grain of salt. But it is interesting to see that that's how they're positioning.
That's the spin. Yeah, it's not about whether it actually
went well. It's going to be a great
well,
success for Putin. He was welcomed with pomp and ceremony. He's a respected world leader. I think that's what Trump has given him out of this.
In this moment, from the Canadian perspective, Canada is a middle power, but Canada has made significant contributions to supporting Ukraine in this moment. Do you think there's more Canada could be doing, or what do you want to see from Canada?
Always. No one thing any country or any ally of Ukraine is doing will be enough. It's a long war now, and it's not ending anytime soon, as we see. What Canada can do, I mean, right now we were pleased to see this week that the Prime Minister with European allies is standing there reminding the American president of the key principles, that it isn't up to the American president to negotiate away Ukrainian territory, that Ukraine needs to be at the table, and those are important voices in this debate, and that has to be said many times and loudly. Everything that we can do includes support for the military, the armaments that literally are protecting Ukrainians every day, the air defense that helps them shoot down these missiles and drones, the hundreds that come every day. And we have to be looking at, this morning we were meeting veterans and military families and the long-term impact that this has on Ukraine, on its people, and all of us who have family members there who are living through this. It's become very shockingly normalized. You can have, every day you can have the same conversation with people about how many missiles, how many drones, where are the fires, how is everybody doing? This is almost 4 years. We're going to be going to year 4 of this. And it's so shockingly normalized that it's hard to sort of shake that feeling that this is going to go on forever.
That is a real difficult when things become normalized, when in this, life or death situation, it just gets so incredibly difficult. Ihor Mikol-Chechin, thank you for your time. You are the CEO and the Executive Director of the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks.
All right, stay with us. We have plenty more here on power and politics. So if Trump is able to negotiate some sort of ceasefire, what might that look like if it could happen? We'll speak with CBC's senior defense writer Murray Brewster next. At this hour, U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have just wrapped up a meeting about Russia's war on Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
We believe they were also speaking about some other things as well, but reporters there shouting questions at the two leaders. Neither said a thing in those final moments before the doors closed and the face-to-face began. CBC senior, there's a lot of people in that room. The CBC senior defense writer, Murray Brewster, my very good friend, joins us now live. Murray, one thing I want to say to our viewers, we are keeping an eye on whether this news conference is going to begin. We've been told, quote, soon it is going to happen, but soon can mean anything.
All of the drama.
Soon, what's a soon? Anyway,
yeah.
so Murray,
it's like a reality show, isn't it?
You'd never guess,
Imagine.
Eh? Imagine.
Yeah, imagine.
So Trump going into this, his bottom line for a meeting has sort of been around aiming toward a ceasefire. The one thing he has been consistent in saying is that he wants the killing to stop. If he gets toward that path, what could a ceasefire look like?
Well, that's a really good question, because a ceasefire could very well be a cessation of hostilities on land, in the air, or at sea. But will that actually be a ceasefire? And this is something that a lot of the defense experts have been debating, because really, when we think about it, Ukraine has been at war with Russia for more than 10 years because of the gray zone conflict that was taking place in the Donbass region, in the eastern regions where Russia has been fighting, and the territories that Russia wants to annex. So how comprehensive is a ceasefire going to be if they're able to agree to it? So that's one of the questions that's hanging out there that people are in the defense community are watching to see. And I think that a lot of the other add-ons to a potential ceasefire are things that folks are watching for as well. Security guarantees. What kind of security guarantees could Ukraine get? Where are Russian forces going to be positioned? Could they restart the war? These are a whole bunch of questions that are going to have to be answered out of this summit meeting if they manage to get to a ceasefire deal.
How secure could a deal out of this meeting be?
That's a good question, because I think it depends upon the willingness of both sides to respect the ceasefire. Now, there were ceasefire agreements in the Donbass region where Russia or Russian proxies had been fighting Ukrainian forces since 2014, the two Minsk Accords, and those accords were not respected. So there's a great deal of skepticism as to whether or not Russia would be violating the ceasefire. And there's also questions about whether Ukraine would necessarily hold on to it too, because Ukraine has made it very clear that they want all of their territory back. So it will continue to be, and could continue to be, a very volatile situation, and where there's not a lot of trust on both sides.
What are the implications at this point for Canada?
At the moment, Canada is very heavily invested in Ukraine, of course, with well over $6 billion in military equipment. But Canada is part of the Coalition of the Willing, which is a French and UK-led group which would put peacekeepers on the ground in between, possibly in between, Russian and Ukrainian forces. A lot of the details haven't worked out. Earlier this week, I spoke with Canada's top military commander, General Jenny Carignan, and she said that she and the other chiefs of defense have been working out a plan, but they're waiting for the ceasefire details and like how robust that force would be. So could Canadian troops be back in Ukraine in a peacekeeping capacity? Very likely. What is even more likely is that Canada will re-up its commitment to continue to train Ukrainian forces, which Canada has been doing since 2015.
Okay. Murray Brewster, thank you very much for your insight. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
For more on what Russian President Vladimir Putin is hoping to get out of today's meeting, we are joined by Jeremy Kinsman. He previously served as Canada's ambassador to Russia. Thank you so much for joining us. One thing I just want to warn our viewers that they will see up on the screen that live shot of the podium there. We are still anticipating that this news conference with U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin could start soon, could start any minute now. So if I interrupt you, my deepest apologies, because we got to jump into that. But I want to start with your sort of analysis, your big takeaways of what you've seen, at least of the public element of this meeting so far.
Well, everybody's mentioned some with some apprehension or disgust that, Trump was applauding Putin and the very, very warm greeting and the sharing of the beast to get to the conference. I think that is totally typical of Trump. He goes into a deal, a negotiation, an encounter where he has to get something. He begins by making nice. I mean, that's just his style. And he's always had a kind of an aversion to the black and white picture of Russia and Ukraine in this thing, to the point, Katie, that quite frankly, he still believed, it seemed as well as recently as 2 weeks ago, that Ukraine started the war, So I don't make a lot out of this. He wants an outcome. And to get an outcome, he needs a compliant and relatively willing person at the other side of the table. Putin's different. Putin is playing the long game. He's been thinking about this for at least 25 years and probably longer, And this is just one way station. The big difference here is that Trump wants a ceasefire. Of course, Ukrainians want a ceasefire by and large. Trump wants it for Ukrainian reasons, for humanitarian reasons, but also for his own reasons, which are pretty short term. Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want a ceasefire because he thinks right now that on the ground and in the air, he's winning. And the inevitability of his more populous country is that they will prevail in the ground war. I don't think it's true. Over, 3.5 years of fighting, at the beginning, Russia held 18% of Ukraine. And today, having given up 1 million lives and casualties, I mean, enormous price Russia's paid, they've gained 1%. And so his fixation on occupying Ukraine, I mean, he's just got to put it beside himself. And I hope that Trump, who's quite forceful, is able, having established a kind of a friendly, guy-to-guy relationship, is able to bring him around to buying the ceasefire. But I'd be doubtful. I think that maybe they're going to start a process of enlarged meetings to include, I guess, Zelensky, of course. No discussion of Ukraine without Ukraine is the basic ethic. And also the Europeans, whom the Russians are trying to separate from the United States. And the Europeans found their spine last week and showed in a show of unity. They laid it down, and they laid it down to Donald Trump in a joint phone call, I think, yesterday. And Trump learned from it, I think. And he's backed off some of his premises that he could do what he calls land swaps just with Putin. So it's up in the air. We'll be looking, with rapt attention. But I think that they're going to say they got along well, that the United States, if things work out, would look forward to a renewed relationship with Russia, and unspoken, but very fundamental to that, is access to Russian minerals, and to something like a renewed discussion of the New START negotiations on nuclear weapons in some time to come. And in the meantime, they will work toward a ceasefire. There are two elements to ceasefire. One's on the ground, that grinding, confrontation on the ground, and the other is in the air. There was some talk that maybe you could, first of all, stop the air war. Both sides are kind of two-minded about that, because both think that they're getting an advantage out of it. Russia is conducting a communications war as well as a ground war, and they're trying to destabilize, demoralize, psychologically distress the Ukrainian public, erode their will to resist, blah, blah, blah. And these repeated, it's been going on now for months and months and months, that if you live in Kyiv, I mean, you can't get a night's sleep. You're sleeping in the metro station. You're grabbing your kids. You're going to a basement shelter. It's just terrible. You're calling around when you wake up to see if your relatives are okay, and people want it to stop, but not at any price. And the Ukrainians, you would think they'd want the air war to stop, but they're actually making a dent in Russian self-confidence by smacking with drones Russian military assets. So, there's a lot out there, and a lot of it is bound up in the psychological interaction between these two men.
Do you think there's anything the American delegation could offer the Russians that would convince Russian President Vladimir Putin to stray from his, big picture, long game plan here, which we know is going after Ukraine? Is there anything the Americans could put to him, do you think, realistically, that would get him sort of, to maybe rethink that long game?
I think that Trump could say to Putin, and I'm not so sure that Trump doesn't believe this, that Trump would welcome Russia to rejoin, in other words, to become again a partner, a global partner of the United States for, issues of world peace and economy and security. That's what Russia wants. He wants to make Russia great again. He's been at it after the humiliation to him of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And when I lived in Russia, it was in a wretched state. And he came in to save it. And he became obsessed by what he thought was the offhanded effort by the West, and particularly the United States, now to dismiss Russia, or earlier the Soviet Union and then Russia, as just a regional power, as Obama put it. I laughed when I saw Sergei Lavrov, whom I knew pretty well, wearing the USSR jersey. You can buy those things at any kiosk in Moscow. It's not a big deal. And I wear a Montreal Expos hat, too, out of nostalgia. I wouldn't take it too seriously, but I did laugh when I saw it.
Mr. Kinsman, I'm going to jump in right now. We've just actually seen, we've got a live shot up right now. We've just seen Mr. Lavrov, who you just mentioned there. He is now in the room taking his spot there. We've seen the American delegation go in as well. Steve Witkoff is there. I believe that's Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff walking in to take their seats now. Susie Wiles, who is Trump's chief of staff, Pete Hegseth, Howard Lutnick, they're all sitting there front row. So any minute now, we are expecting both U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin to walk into that room. I'm going to keep asking you questions, but if I interrupt you, the reason is because we've got some sort of indication that they are coming into the room, but it is very clear this is imminent. The people that were actually in that 3-on-3 meeting, on the American side, it was Trump, Witkoff, who is the special envoy who had been in Russia and helped set this up, Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State. They are all in their place, so this could start any second now. Sure. But I want to put to you, what are you anticipating in this moment as these leaders are about to take to the podiums? What realistically are you expecting to hear?
Well, it's part realism and partly the essentials of show business, because that's what this is, right? Each is putting on a show, and above all, Trump, it's staged, and he doesn't want to stage a confrontation, an event which trickles into a deepened hostility. So they're going to try and make the best out of it. I just don't. And if Trump does get a ceasefire, agreement for a ceasefire, whatever that means, out of Putin, I'd be pretty surprised, but I think it would be great. That would be a big win. I think they're going to get some kind of statement of common understanding of each other's.
I'm going to interrupt you. They've arrived. Okay, we are going to listen in. Both Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin are taking to their podiums. We'll listen in live right now.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We have very thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we've met, when I came out of the plane and I've said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of, more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well, there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots are buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue, naturally under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation is tremendous.
Актуальным видится и